You're walking down a city street and your shoe lands on metal. That hollow clang under your heel that always sounds like the floor of the world is thinner than it should be. You glance down. A heavy iron disc, scuffed and oily, with a pattern stamped into it and the name of some company nobody's heard of. A few blocks later, you step on another one. This one's square, same metal, same scuffed surface, but flat-sided, rectangular even, and somewhere in your brain a little flag goes up. Wait, why was that one round and this one square? Are they connected to the same thing underneath? Is one wrong? You're not alone. Most people who notice the difference assume it's random. Different decades, different contractors, different city contracts. Maybe the round ones are sewers and the square ones are something else. Maybe whoever was paving the street that year just grabbed whatever was on the truck. Here's the thing, it's not random at all. The shape isn't aesthetic. The shape isn't tradition. The shape is a decision made by an engineer. And the choice between round and square comes down to a single piece of geometry. A piece of geometry that, in the wrong place, can kill someone. So why are most manhole covers round? Why aren't they all round? And why does the question matter enough that a software company in Redmond used to ask it in job interviews to see how candidates thought? The answer involves a famous brain teaser, 100 years of industrial fatalities, and a property of circles that's so obvious nobody notices it until it saves a life. The shape isn't a shape. The shape is a safety feature. Think about what a manhole cover is actually doing. It's a portable lid sitting on top of a hole that drops 20, 30, sometimes 50 feet straight down into wet, dark infrastructure. Sewers, storm drains, electrical vaults, steam tunnels, telecom conduits. Underneath every cover is a confined space full of either fast-moving water, high-voltage equipment, or air that can kill you in 3 breaths. The cover has one main job: stay put. Cars drive over it. People walk over it. Garbage trucks lurch over it loaded with 20 tons of trash. The cover has to handle all of that without shifting, without breaking, and without becoming a hazard to the next person who steps on it. And it has a second job, which is even more important. When a city worker pulls it off to climb down inside, the cover has to come back up and seat back into its frame without dropping into the hole. Because the hole is, by definition, deep enough to kill someone. And there's almost always a worker at the bottom. So now the question gets sharp. What shape of lid can never under any circumstance fall into the hole it covers? Most people, asked this for the first time, guess it's about weight. A heavy enough cover won't tip in. Wrong. Manhole covers weigh well over 100 pounds. Some industrial ones approach 300, and they still fall when geometry lets them. Some people guess it's about the frame. The lip the cover rests on must catch any cover, any shape, if it's wide enough. Also wrong. The lip is only as wide as a few millimeters in most designs. If a cover can rotate inside the frame, the lip won't catch it. Other people guess it's about the workers. They're careful. They wouldn't drop a cover into a hole. But every single year in cities across the world, covers do drop in. Sometimes during installation. Sometimes after a truck strikes one and rotates it out of alignment. Sometimes when a worker is hauling one out and loses grip. The shape has to be foolproof. Because workers, by definition, are not foolproof. So if it's not weight, not the frame, not the workers, what is it? Here's the answer. A circle has the same diameter in every direction. No matter how you rotate a circular cover, no matter what angle you tilt it, no matter how you try to drop it into its own opening, the cover will not fit through. The diameter going north to south is identical to the diameter going east to west. There is no way to orient a circle that makes it smaller than its own hole. A square doesn't have that property. A square's side might be, say, 24 inches, but its diagonal, corner to corner, is nearly 34 inches. So if you tilt a square cover up on its edge, the diagonal lines up with the hole, and the cover drops in, straight down, onto whoever's working below. This is the trick. A round cover cannot fall into a round hole because a circle has no shorter axis to exploit. A square cover absolutely can fall into a square hole because the diagonal is always longer than the side. The shape isn't decorative. The shape is the difference between a cover that stays out of the hole when you fumble it and a cover that drops 150 pounds of cast iron onto a person's skull. Once you see it, you understand why the round cover became dominant. It's the only shape that's geometrically idiot-proof. Now here's where the story gets uglier. For most of the 1800s and early 1900s, manhole covers came in every shape. Square, rectangular, oval, triangular, hexagonal. Industrial cities were a patchwork of whatever the local foundry could cast cheapest. And throughout that entire era, workers died in confined space accidents tied to falling covers. The pattern showed up in industrial accident reports across the United States, the UK, Germany, anywhere you had dense urban infrastructure, and a workforce climbing into vaults to maintain it. A worker would be down inside an electrical vault doing repairs. Up at street level, a delivery truck would hit the open manhole's frame, or a co-worker would mishandle the lifted cover. The cover, square or rectangular, would tip, rotate, and drop straight down the shaft. The investigation would find the same conclusion every time. The geometry allowed it. The injuries were rarely survivable. A 150-pound disc of cast iron falling 30 feet hits with enough force to crush a skull through a hard hat. Even a glancing blow could break a collarbone, dislocate a shoulder, or knock a worker off the ladder rungs into the wet darkness at the bottom of the shaft. Confined space rescue teams documented case after case where the falling cover wasn't the only hazard. Once a worker was injured at the bottom, the rescue itself became a second confined space operation, sometimes requiring the entire shaft to be ventilated, supported, and shored before anyone could go down to retrieve them. By the mid-20th century, municipal codes started consolidating. Cities standardized on round covers for any opening with a worker-accessible shaft underneath. Sewers, telecom vaults, steam tunnels, electrical access points. The American Society for Testing and Materials, ASTM, wrote specifications that effectively made round the default for any cover over a deep confined space. The shape became a regulation, then a habit, then so universal that most people forgot it was a choice. And then in the 1990s, the shape became famous for a completely different reason. Microsoft, during its hiring boom, started asking job candidates a question in technical interviews. Why are manhole covers round? The question wasn't really about manhole covers. It was about whether the candidate could reason from first principles to a non-obvious answer. The correct answer, that a circle's constant diameter prevents the cover from falling through its own hole, became one of the most famous brain-teaser answers in tech history. The interview question outlived the practice. Microsoft eventually stopped asking it, but the answer entered popular culture, which is part of why so many people now half remember it. The shape is round so it can't fall in. Not for cars, not for tradition, not for ease of rolling, though that's a nice secondary benefit. The shape is round because the alternative kills people. Here's the honest part though. Round isn't always the answer. There are real reasons square covers exist, and they exist by the millions. Square covers show up where the opening isn't a worker-accessible shaft. Storm drain grates set flush against a curb. Electrical pull boxes flush with a sidewalk. Valve access covers over shallow water main fittings. These don't have a 50-foot drop underneath. The worst case if the cover tips is that it falls a few inches into a recess. No human is going to die. So the falling through concern goes away, and you get to use a square cover, which has its own advantages. A square cover is easier to manufacture. Casting a perfect circle requires a more precise mold than casting a square. A square cover stacks more efficiently in a warehouse. A square cover lines up cleanly against walls and curbs without leaving awkward triangular gaps. For shallow utility access, the square wins on every dimension that doesn't involve a worker underneath. And there's a third category, rectangular covers. The long flat ones you see over electrical service entries. Those exist because the equipment below needs a wide, narrow access opening, not a circular one. You can't fit a long fluorescent transformer rack through a round hole without a much larger circle. The rectangle matches the equipment, and the rectangle is again positioned where there's no shaft to fall into. So the rule isn't round good, square bad. The rule is, anywhere a person could be standing under that cover, the cover is round. Anywhere there's no one under it, the shape is whatever's most practical. Once you know the rule, you can read a city street like a manual. Round means there's a worker shaft below. Square means it's a shallow utility recess. Rectangular means there's industrial equipment underneath that needs a long opening. Modern composite covers, fiberglass, polymer concrete, are starting to change the math because they're lighter, which makes accidental drops less catastrophic. But the round shape persists because the geometry was never about weight. It was about whether the cover could possibly fit through its own opening. And a circle, by definition, cannot, which is what makes the next walk down the street different. You'll see the round ones. You'll see the square ones. You'll see the long rectangular ones outside office buildings. And now you'll know, without looking underneath, which ones are sitting over a 50-foot drop and which ones are sitting over a 6-inch recess. Look at the lifting holes. 2 small holes near the edge of every cover. Those aren't decorative. They're for a special tool called a manhole hook, the only thing that's supposed to lift the cover. A worker drops the hook in, leverages the cover up and over without ever putting fingers under the edge. Because cast iron on a fingernail is exactly as bad as it sounds. Look at the pattern stamped on the top. The diamond grid or the floral pattern or the city seal. That's not for show. That's for traction. A flat metal cover in the rain is a slip hazard. The raised pattern bites into a shoe or a tire and keeps the surface grippable in any weather. Look at the company name cast into the metal. Most American covers carry the name of the foundry that cast them. East Jordan Iron Works, McCoy Iron and Metal, Neenah Foundry. Those companies have been making these covers for, in some cases, more than 150 years. Some of the covers under your feet right now were cast before your grandparents were born. And look at the rim around the edge, the part that sits inside the frame. That's machined to fit. A rough fit lets the cover rattle under traffic, which loosens it over time and creates a hazard. A precise fit keeps it silent. The clang you hear walking over a manhole is the sound of a cover that hasn't been reseated properly. The silent ones are doing their job. Look at the small notches around the edge too. Those are pry points for the manhole hook, positioned so a worker can lever the cover open from multiple angles without forcing it to tip in any direction that could slip into the hole. Even the lifting motion is geometrically managed. The round cover isn't a shape. It's a 150-year-old promise that the lid you can't see through can't possibly fall on the person you can't see underneath. The shape is the safety, and every time you step on one without thinking about it, the geometry is doing the thinking for you.